Welcome back, my friends, to the 𝐷𝑒𝑟𝑎𝑡𝑒 𝑇ℎ𝑒 podcast. Now, this is going to be a bonus episode, and tonight we're going to be talking about the war going on over in Israel between the terrorist organization Hamas and their invasion and terrorist attacks upon the nation of Israel just a few days ago. For that conversation, I've invited my friend Moshe Levy back to the 𝐷𝑒𝑟𝑎𝑡𝑒 𝑇ℎ𝑒 podcast. You might remember Moshe from a conversation we had back in I think it's back in maybe June of 2022. It's been quite a while, but thank you, Moshe. Thank you for joining me for this bonus episode of the 𝐷𝑒𝑟𝑎𝑡𝑒 podcast. So
great to be here.
Yes, thank you so much. So Moshe, for just for my understanding and the understanding of the 𝐷𝑒𝑟𝑎𝑡𝑒's listeners, could you please just give me a quick rundown? What is your relationship to the nation of Israel?
Okay, so my parents are Israeli. They immigrated here in the late 60s. And besides my parents, my brother and my sister, my entire family, all aunts, uncles, cousins, etc., down the line are still in Israel. So we are routinely visiting them, in touch with them. I usually go once a year, if not more. Very intimately involved in the history of Israel. I'm familiar with the politics of Israel. And our family business also serves the U.S. military and to a smaller degree, the IDF with the products that we produce. So we're supporters of the state in a very major way. Volunteer for it, donate to it, and so on. So I'm familiar with it from an American perspective. I am American. I was born here, but I also am a citizen of the state.
So you do hold a dual citizenship then?
Yes, sir.
With the state of Israel and then the United States. Okay. All right. And what part of Israel is the majority of your family? Are they spread out throughout?
Spread out throughout, all over the place.
I think a lot of what's going on right now with the terrorist attacks that happened, I know there's a lot of heavy shelling down in the Ashkelon area, and the it sounds like this nightmare started with really some coordinated attacks, some motorized paragliders coming in and shooting up a music festival and stuff. So what can you tell me? What are you hearing from your family members over there right now? Is everybody safe? Is what I mean, as safe as they can be? Obviously, there's rockets coming in. There's everything we're seeing on television right now, hearing on the radio, sirens constantly going off, people hiding in bunkers. What are you hearing from your family members, and can you kind of describe what they're going through right now?
Yeah, sure. So rockets falling on Israel, unfortunately, is not an uncommon event, and they have some defenses against it. There are audible warnings. There is the Iron Dome, which shoots most of these rockets down in midair. There are bunkers that every house has, and there are sort of protocols that you have to follow. You usually have like 15, 20 seconds to duck, and you just cover your children or do whatever you have to do. It's sad that people have to live this way, but I don't want to say they're used to it, but they understand that that's part of life in that neighborhood. What they're most upset about now is that a bunch of terrorists infiltrated the country, which should have never happened. I mean, this is a state with a tremendous security apparatus, and I'm sure that questions will be asked and their consequences will be severe for how these people managed to infiltrate in such large numbers, but they did. And they essentially unleashed barbarism unseen on the Jewish people since the Holocaust. 1,200 Jews dead in a day is the equivalent of about 33,000 Americans dead in one day. It's 10 times what 9/11 was for America in terms of population. And what they did was not just, shoot people indiscriminately. They actually engaged in terrorism of the highest order. They beheaded babies. They took old people in wheelchairs and shot them point blank. They burned families alive. at the music festival, it's reported now that something on the order of about 40 girls were raped in the dirt alongside the corpses of their dead friends. They took hostages, they took them back to Gaza, and they basically have video of them parading around the broken bodies of these girls, raped, bloody, to cheering crowds who are throwing candy and howling and screaming and basically engaged in bloodlust. So it's important that people understand that what my family is seeing and what all Israelis are seeing is not run-of-the-mill warfare from terrorism, but the sort of debauchery that you would think doesn't exist anymore, but it does. You're talking about rape, mutilation, desecration of corpses, dragging them through the street, old people, young people, grandmothers, people who are 95 years old being tortured in front of their families. All of this broadcast live. So it would be as though the Nazis had Twitter or Facebook. One story that just came out yesterday was that they took a grandmother's phone and used it to live stream her, basically killing her so that her entire family would see it live. So they see that and they juxtapose that happening to them with the reaction of the world. And they see good people jumping up and running and springing into action, donating, saying the right things, condemning it. But they also see parades popping up in Berlin and London and Toronto, New York City, where people are expressly cheering for the bloodletting. In New York yesterday, where I spent most of my life in New Jersey, there was a parade either yesterday or the day before where they were holding up the paraders were holding up their phones like this with images of the dead girls or the raped girls or swastikas, and then looking at the camera and going like this, like boo-hoo.
Yeah.
Now these same people, when they get what's coming to them, which is what's coming to them, will be the first ones in line to cry and say, oh, how can this happen? We need an immediate de-escalation. This is collective punishment, and on and on and on. But for the moment, they're actually cheering the death of human beings for no other reason than that they're Jewish. And if you study those parades and you look at them, and they're all over the place for you to see, you'll see that the slogans that they use, for example, in Sydney, the slogans that they were using in English was gas the Jews, kill the Jews, gas the Jews. This is not about, and it never was, about the liberation of Palestine or about land or about anything else other than abject hatred for people who are not your religion.
Yeah, and that's what I want to get into, Moshe, is how did this thing... So we've got Hamas, which is a terrorist organization that is so-called elected down in the Gaza Strip, in the Palestine, I guess is what people refer to it as, but Palestinian people have so-called elected Hamas. I don't know personally how that relationship between Hamas and the Palestinians came to be, but then on the northern front, you've got Hezbollah. I think that's the Lebanese front on the northern edge, up near the Golan Heights. So now we're talking about rocket attacks from the Lebanese and Hezbollah. And a lot of this, from my understanding, and I can only go off, and I've never been over there. I've got a good friend that I lost contact with a number of years ago, but I know he lives over there, so I worry for him and his family. But and I've got several other friends that I've made, and through this podcast that are over there now. But I know just geographically, we've got this very small area. We've got the Jewish people that developed the Jewish state. Well, they didn't develop it, obviously. This has been the land that given to the Jewish people by God. In my in my recollection of things, thousands of years ago. Where did this hate start, Moshe? What began this conflict? Because there's a lot of people right now, and I'm just going to blame it on pure ignorance. The fact that there is so many people today that truly do not understand the origin of this hatred, but it is a learned behavior from people who are completely ignorant to what is actually real over there. Just briefly tell me and the DTH listeners, where did this hatred originate? Because you aren't born with this kind of hatred that you would do this kind of thing to babies and women and children and the elderly. That hatred is a learned behavior, and it's learned over a long period of time. It is an evil that is taught. It is not born within us, because we're all human beings, and to be able to do that to another human being is the ultimate evil. But we cannot discount the fact that that is a learned behavior. Where did they learn this from? How did this come to be?
Okay, so there have been volumes written about the origins of anti-Semitism or hatred of the Jewish people. And it is worth mentioning that anti-Semitism is unlike any other hatred for any other minority group. And I'll explain that briefly. If you look at the stereotypes of any minority group, it doesn't matter what it is, that experiences discrimination, you're not going to see a lot of difference between those stereotypes from 300, 400, 500 years ago and those stereotypes today. It's the same old thing with ignorant people basically judging people on their skin color or on their religion or whatever it is. And over time, hopefully, people learn to do that less and less. I think we're better today than we were, say 200 years ago in this country. But anti-Semitism is different. Anti-Semitism is the only hatred directed at people which changes with the time. And in the time that you exist, the Jew is always the worst possible thing that you can be to that specific ideology. So for example, in the 1920s, the Jews in America were portrayed by popular broadcasters like Father Coughlin and others as fifth column communists that were here basically with dual loyalties and basically looking to overthrow the entire American capitalist system in order to enact communism. At the same time that that was happening, in Russia, the government of Russia was moving against the Jews as fifth column capitalists within Russia that were seeking to overthrow communism and establish capitalism. On the right, the Jews are the devil incarnate because they're not white and they're basically killers of Jesus and all the rest of it that the right-wingers think. On the left, the Jews are colonizers, occupiers, white supremacists, the exact opposite of what the other side is saying. And so the Jew, anywhere he is, has nowhere to run. You can't run right, they hate you there. You can't run left, they hate you there. And so the origin of it really depends on who is giving it to you. Is it the blood libels of the Catholic Church from 1500 years ago that informed Hitler's thinking? Is it the idea in Islam that anyone who's not Islamic is kuffar, meaning less than human, and therefore less worthy of respect than you because of your religion versus his? The Middle East is a rough neighborhood. Islam, when it runs into the radical section of it, is not a tolerant religion of anything other than Islam. The Jews have a thousands and thousands of year-old history in countries like Iraq and Egypt, Syria. These are communities that were going back to before the time of Jesus himself, and they're gone. Those communities are gone. They were run out, and there's not a single Jew left in any of those countries. And the Christians are also dwindling in those countries right now because there's no tolerance for anything except for Islam when the country is run by radical Islamic sort of organizations. And the origin there is strictly religious. So anyone who argues that this conflict is about land, and this conflict is essentially a cycle of violence, is hopelessly ignorant about the topic. We're talking about a landmass which is smaller than New Jersey on an area of land that's bigger than the United States. This is not prime land. It's not on oil. There's no natural resources. It's just a desert with essentially none of the facets of land that people usually fight over, which is natural resources. This is about religion. This is about a religion which tells you that if somebody thinks differently from you, that he's less than human, and it's okay to kill him. And you can dehumanize people all day long, and they do it. So their media, their movies, their leaders are very happy to distract their populations, which are living in abject misery in backwards countries with no GDP, no jobs, no prospects, no prosperity whatsoever, except for the people who know the leaders of the country. The whole thing is backwards. And you just say it's the Jews' fault. And you do that for a couple of generations, and you basically grow up with it from birth. The Palestinians are especially good at this. There are videos of kindergartners that are graduating kindergarten with guns in their hands, dressed up like little Hamas soldiers. They indoctrinate these kids in that from a very, very early age. And to a Western liberal like me, or like the way that most Israelis are, the idea that you would indoctrinate your child in hatred from the beginning is repugnant. But over there, it's normal, and you have to deal with the consequences. So that's essentially the origin of it in that neighborhood. In that neighborhood, it's religious.
That is it, yeah, and it is so unfortunate. I mean, obviously, with the 𝐷𝒐𝒅𝒂𝒕 podcast and the work that you know that I've been doing for several years now, Moshe, one of the things that I talk about so often is hate being a learned behavior, and evil not being something that we're born to, and evil acts are something that are, it's awful. I try not to label people as evil, because I think it takes, I think once you call somebody evil, it takes away some of the accountability. I think it's a human being performing evil acts, and they need to be held accountable for it. In this case, I think we're, unfortunately, I've heard things over the past couple of days that just turn my stomach, Moshe, when people talk about a measured response, and we hear the president of the United States, who I am no fan of by any long stretch of the imagination. But I mean, there were some of the things in the speeches that he's given over the past couple of days that I agree with. I thought that were very well stated. But then today he makes a statement to Benjamin Netanyahu of, we have to remember that there are rules to war, and you can only, and that kind of thing. To me, I like the idea that Benjamin Netanyahu says, if you are part of Hamas, consider yourself dead. You're all done. Because I think every right-minded person right now needs to look at this and say, if Hamas is not eradicated, it's a victory for them. I mean, anything less than total eradication of Hamas at this point is a victory for them, and I think that's unfortunate, because again, they are human beings, but they are human beings who have been bred into an evil ideology and trained that way from birth, and they're really, when you get to the point where you can desecrate the dead, behead babies, execute elderly people as they sit there on live stream with their grandchildren. That is the most horrific act that any human being could ever perform, and it's all bred out of hatred. And
Yeah.
This kind of barbarism, I think, is a great word that you used earlier. This kind of barbarism can only be dealt with such a horrific response that people, and let's make no mistake about it, and for everybody that's listening, you have to understand, for war, or for peace to be had, war has to be so horrific that the enemy does not ever consider doing it again. And I hate that. I hate that for the people that have to go in there. But as we know right now, there's hundreds of thousands of reserve IDF soldiers waiting to go into one of the most horrific things that they will ever experience in their entire life. And it's all bred out of hatred. It's all bred out of hatred for people who have been taught an evil ideology based purely upon ignorance. And it's painful for me as a human being to even say that, but it has to become such a horrific response that nobody ever tries it again. And
Yes.
and it's all because of hate, Moshe. It's all because of hatred.
There's a lot there, and I think it would probably help your American listeners to think about the fact that if you think about America as a country, it's so enormous that if it went to war, you might not even know that you're at war. I mean, we have been at war, and as citizens, we're shopping in the mall and nobody knows it. But if you're in a tiny country and this is happening, you definitely know people who have been killed, maimed, injured, raped, and so on. And you take that and you juxtapose that feeling when some world leader or another says, well, I know you just saw 40 babies beheaded and your wife raped and your sister murdered and on and on and on, but it's time for a measured response. It's time to take it easy, de-escalate, violence solves nothing. And you look at that guy and you say, what if this was your country? Instead of theorizing about that, what did you do when it was your country? When the United States went to war, or when Europeans go to war, or any of these leaders that's like, brandishing the idea that now is the time to put on the kid gloves so that they can do it again to us in 2 years. What did you do with the Japanese? What did you do with the Germans? What did you do when you were in Iraq? What did you do when you were in Afghanistan? Did you put on the kid gloves? Did you take it easy? And you're talking about a situation where it's not war. It's not an army coming in, bombing Pearl Harbor, that you can go back at their army. It's your children. It's terrorism. It's cutting heads off babies. And you have people who are so caught up in ideology and hatred that they can't bring themselves to call cutting heads off babies terrorism. Ireland, Luxembourg just refused when the EU said, maybe we should cut off the aid to the Palestinians. They said, this isn't terrorism. We're not cutting off the aid. If cutting the heads off babies isn't terrorism, what is? How many more dead babies should we have had? And what exactly is a proportionate response? Should we kill 40 of their babies? Is that how this works?
Right.
The idea that, it's a simple thought experiment. I'm at home with my wife, and a couple of people break in, 2 people break in and start beating the crap out of me and raping my wife. And there's 10 policemen outside. Do I want 2 cops to come in so that they can fight the 2 people that broke in? Or do I want all 10 cops to come in and make sure they do everything they can to save my wife first and save me afterwards? Isn't that the definition of disproportionate response? It's exactly what you want when you're faced with something like this. But I'm going to read something quick to you. I saved it because I wanted you to read it. I wanted to read it to you, rather. This is a very brief tweet that was written by Najma Sharif. She writes for Teen Vogue, and so it's for children. She posted this on Twitter. It says, and this is as the images of the girls being raped were first coming out on Saturday and Sunday. The girls were raped and their pants were bloody by the crotch, and they were being paraded through the streets of Gaza where people were throwing candy at their head and men were beating them with sticks. Those are the images that people were seeing when she wrote, and I quote, "What did you all think decolonization meant? Vibes, papers, essays? You're losers." Her post has been liked 100,000 times and reposted 25,000 times, including by the Washington Post's global opinions editor. That's a mainstream newspaper that can look at images like this and say, it's all part of the decolonization project, whatever that means, as though Jews are colonizing Judea, where we came from. So I don't understand this mentality, but I find it sickening. And I think that the people in Israel also find it sickening and tune out of it. And that's what's going to make this a very violent situation for Hamas. They don't give a damn anymore that somebody in some comfortable basement in Washington, D.C. thinks you ought to take it easy. It's my child. And I know what you'd do if it was yours. Now it's mine. I get to do what I want. I don't want this anymore. I don't want to live next to barbarians anymore. It's a society. It's not a few bad apples. It's a society full of sick people who glorify death. Their religion glorifies death. Once they die, they throw parades and they basically lionize whoever died in service of this as a shaheed, as a martyr, and they sing songs to him and so on and so forth. The Jewish people don't do that. The Jewish people lionize life. When Israel had a situation where there was one soldier, one that was abducted, they released 1,500 terrorists from jail to get the one soldier back. Those 1,500, several of them were involved in masterminding this. We already know that. But the idea is that you'll do anything just to save one life. Never mind have the mentality or a society or a culture which is celebrating and throwing candy when you're parading around broken bodies of young girls. And also, no one in the crowd notices the fact that these are young men with sticks that are getting young girls or getting children, there's pictures of animal cages with 5, 6, 7 Jewish children, 4, 5, 6 years old, crammed into them on their hands and knees and iron bars all day, being beaten with sticks. They're very, very brave when it comes to children and young girls and women and grandmothers. But now they're going to have to face our young men and our guns. And it's not 1930 anymore. We're not running from where we live. They're going to get what's coming to them, and it's going to be a horror show. And frankly, don't give a goddamn what the world thinks of it. They're going to be crying for them, and their hearts are going to be bleeding for them, and it makes no difference. Because they don't care about us until we're dead. Then they finally mourn us and say, oh, this should have never happened. How did this happen? No more of that. This is not World War II anymore. We don't go like sheep to the slaughter anymore. This is our country. We're going to defend it from these people. If they can't live side by side with us like human beings, they won't live.
Right. No, and you know, you mentioned an incredible thought experiment there, and it's here's a thought experiment that one of the people I listen to and quite admire quite a bit is Dennis Prager, and he says he said several times when it comes to the Jewish people and Hamas and Hezbollah and Iran and things, what would happen if the Jewish people, or this is one of those things that what would happen if the Jewish people all laid down their arms tomorrow and said, we will never fight again? What would happen? The Jewish people would be exterminated in hours. Now, what would happen if Hamas and Hezbollah and Iran laid down their weapons and said, we will never fight again? Nothing. The Jewish people are not going to come after them. I mean, now they would. I mean, that would. Okay, so let's go back to about 5 days ago, right? Different story. Yeah, it's a different story today. But yeah, these fighters and they're terrorists. They're not militants. I keep on seeing different people describe them in different ways, and depending on who's writing it.
Euphemisms. They're not terrorists. They just cut the heads off babies, but they're not terrorists. They're militants, or they're
freedom fighters, or whatever.
Fighters, or they're members of a political group.
No, they are terrorists. They are terrorists, steeped in an ideology of hate and looking to inflict as much pain on the Jewish people. Moshe, this conversation is terrifying to think of what is happening in that region of the world. We both have people that we love in the region, but more importantly, we need to remember that innocent people whose lives will never ever be the same are in harm's way today because of hatred. Because of ignorance, and because of people who have no regard for human life or their fellow human beings. And they will meet their fate soon. Moshe, I wish you the best. I wish your family the best. God bless you, and God bless the people from the state of Israel, and Jewish people all over the world. This again is another time in history, just another example of how hate for a group of people because they aren't like other people is being taken out on people who are the ultimate of innocence. So, any final words for the DTH listeners in this bonus episode, Moshe?
I think it's important for us to start speaking frankly about the importance of a clear morality, not using euphemisms, not pretending that it's sophisticated to see nuance where beheaded babies are concerned. Maybe there's a reason why they beheaded babies. Maybe we ought to look into that. Maybe they didn't have a job, something like that. We have to have clear, absolute type morality where murdering innocent people is wrong. If you go to war with an army. Or if you have violence, let it be in self-defense, not in offense against a bunch of children who are dancing in the field. I think that the more we move in that direction and move away from the sort of moral rot of those who would think that there's some way to sort of rationalize this sort of behavior, the better off we'll all be.
Could not have said it better, man. You have to seek a better morality, a better way. Thank you, Moshe Levy, for joining me on the 𝐷𝑒𝑟𝑎𝑡𝑒 𝑇ℎ𝑒 podcast. Stay well, my friend, and we definitely need to stay in touch. We need to talk more often than we have been.
Absolutely. Sounds great.
Friends, if there's anything in this episode that provided exceptional value to you, please make sure to hit that share button. Share it with your friends, share it far and wide. And of course, if you haven't done so already, be sure to subscribe right from our website so you can get the 𝐷𝑒𝑟𝑎𝑡𝑒 podcast sent to your email inbox every week. So this is 𝑊𝑖𝑙𝑘 wrapping up for the week saying get out there, be kind to one another, be grateful for everything that you've got, and remember it's up to you to make each and every day the day that you want it to be. If there is something that you would like to share with me, you can catch me on most social media platforms, or you can email me directly, @𝑊𝑖𝑙𝑘@𝑊𝑖𝑐𝑠world.com. With that, my friends, I am going to back on out of here, and we will catch you next week. Take care.